Story 1. Just 2 years back, in our town, there was a house abandoned for what I guessed was about 2 decades. It was an old place tucked away in the trees, and after no one bought it, everyone simply forgot. It gradually got swallowed by the woods and left to decay. I've always been drawn to places like this and love exploring them. One random afternoon off from work, that's exactly what I did. I walked there with a small backpack and a flashlight. Usually, I'd go with friends, but this house was so close and seemed less significant than other spots we'd visited, so I didn't bother bringing them along. The driveway leading into the woods was nearly gone, overgrown with grass. I pushed through it, eventually pulling out my flashlight to see better. The house was deeper in the woods than I remembered. It felt like I walked for 5 or 6 minutes before reaching it. It was an old wooden home, built before garages were common, looking something like a large 2-story cabin. I approached one of the front windows, which was broken, and leaned my head inside. I listened for 30 seconds to confirm I was alone, then, hearing nothing, went to the front door. It was unlocked and slightly ajar, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. The inside was decaying everywhere. Disturbingly, there was still stuff from whoever owned it all those years ago. The living room had an old, torn-up, dusty sofa, and several picture frames lay shattered on the floor. I walked through the first floor, looking at all the abandoned things, curious about what I might uncover about the place. The floor was small, though. After just a minute or two, I headed upstairs. The stairs creaked and felt shaky. I was surprised they hadn't collapsed already. The second floor had a hallway with 2 rooms. One door was open, the other closed. I peeked into the open one. The room was empty, strikingly different from downstairs. I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight around. It was interrupted by a thud from below. My heart raced instantly. It didn't sound natural, like a noise the house would make. I hurried down the stairs, waving my flashlight around. The house was eerily quiet now, and I saw nothing moving that could have made the sound. Still, I had a bad gut feeling and told myself I should just leave. Usually, when I explore with friends, we always agree to leave at the first sign of anything sketchy. Alone, I definitely wasn't staying. I quickly walked down the hallway, still moving my flashlight around, but when I reached the front of the house, the door was shut. I'd left it wide open. I rushed to it and pulled the handle, but it didn't budge. It was locked or bolted from the outside. I immediately panicked, knowing someone else had to be there with me and had just locked me in. I ran to the broken window and jumped out. As I sprinted into the woods, turning off my flashlight and avoiding the path, I didn't see anyone. My heart was still racing as I moved between the trees. Then a light appeared ahead. I paused behind a tree. It was a red and blue flickering light at the end of the driveway. 2 cop cars were cutting through the thick grass, driving toward the abandoned house. They passed me, rushing to the front as I stayed hidden. Something told me they weren't there for me. I watched for a minute, then ran out of the woods and back home. I don't know who else was there or why the police were rushing toward the house. I tried to find more information in the coming weeks, but found nothing released to the public. Whatever, or whoever, was in there must have been serious. I'm lucky to be here right now. Story 2 by KJ. It was 2016. I lived with my 2 best friends, I'll call them Jason and Andrew for privacy, as roommates in an apartment in the city while finishing our last year of college. Since we were all in school and working, we didn't often have much free time. When we did, our usual activity was hiking or, more broadly, exploring. Sometimes we'd follow trails or just drive to a random town we hadn't been to before and wander around. That week, we all had Friday and Saturday off, so we wanted something to do Friday night. Andrew had heard from a friend earlier about a decommissioned factory on the outskirts of the city. It sounded cool, or at least interesting. None of us had done anything like this before, though, so we were all hesitant. In the end, we said, screw it, and decided to check it out. We piled into Jason's car and drove to the edge of the city we lived in, the Midwest. where the city abruptly ends and turns into flat land, stretching as far as you could see. That was basically where this factory was. We didn't know its exact address, if it even still had one, but we found it on Google Maps using the satellite view. We parked a block away at a gas station and walked the rest of the way. The whole street was empty, no cars or people anywhere. It almost felt like the entire block was abandoned. The factory building was much bigger than any of us expected. It was massive, with railing-like structures all over the outside and tons of graffiti in places. I don't even know how people got to the chain-link fence. It had barbed wire across the top, but in several spots it had clearly been cut open and moved aside for sneaking in. We crawled over and made our way to the metal front door, which was already open. As soon as we stepped inside, chills ran through me. The whole building was swaying, and the metal creaked and groaned. It was windy outside, so that made sense, but it still added to the eeriness. All the lights were off, of course, so our only light was some cheap flashlights Andrew had lying around his house. The main room we were in was full of huge, rusted machinery and narrow pathways between them. We all stayed in that room, kind of just wandering around. Eventually, I wandered to the end of the room and into a hallway. Before entering, I glanced back and saw one of my buddies wasn't too far behind me. I couldn't tell if it was Andrew or Jason since they were in the dark by one of the machines, but I figured they saw me, so I was safe to keep going without risking splitting up and getting lost. I started walking down the hallway, making it to another metal door and going through it. Just as I was walking into the next room, the door started closing, and I heard footsteps coming down the hallway from the end I'd just come from. Thinking it was Andrew and Jason, I kept walking and shone my light around the room. There were more machines, like a conveyor belt in the middle of the space. But along the ceiling was a walkway or catwalk, and I could see a ladder hanging down on the other side. As I was looking, I heard the door open and close behind me. I called out my friends' names and turned around to tell them what I saw, but when my light hit the door, they weren't there. No one was there. I almost thought I was crazy for a second, but I knew I heard the door open. Andrew, Jason, their names echoed across the room, but there was no reply. I started carefully walking over to the door, my mind starting to worry. I opened it and shone my light down the hallway. It was empty. What the hell? I didn't have time to think before hearing a slight crumble on the ground behind me. I spun my light around. Standing maybe 6 or 7 feet from me was some deranged-looking man. He had long hair, a messy beard, and strange, glazed-over eyes. He instantly started sprinting at me like he was trying to tackle me. I backed into the hallway and slammed the door on him, then sprinted for the other end. I could hear my buddies calling out to me, trying to find me. I ran into the room and yelled at them to leave. We all ran out. We made it to the fence and left. On the way back to the car, I explained what happened. Whoever that guy was hiding in the building had waited for me to split off from the group before attacking. What he would have done, I'm lucky I didn't find out. Since then, we haven't tried anything like that again. Story 3 by L. Ortega. This was nearly 5 years ago when I was in high school. My best friend was a guy named Colton. We hung out most days after school and just found random places to go and hang out. Anyway, this was right after our school let out for winter break, so we had tons of time and nothing to do. We spent the whole day chilling at his place, playing Xbox, but eventually got bored. We felt like walking around or going somewhere. Our whole town always knew about this creepy church at the end of a deserted road. It was kind of blocked by trees since they stopped maintaining it. It had been abandoned as long as I'd known, but even though we always knew about it, it had never really occurred to us to explore it. When I was a kid, I was always terrified of it, but for some reason now I was a little more intrigued. So when me and Colton were walking around the edge of town and happened to pass by the deserted road to the church, we decided to check it out. At least walk down the road and see what it looked like now. If no one else was there, maybe even look inside. It was already dark out, but the moon was bright enough for us to still kind of see where we were going. We also had our phones with us just in case we needed a flashlight. The road was awful, cracked and with thick vines and bushes growing between the pavement. By the time we got to the end of it and looked back, we couldn't even see the street we'd just come from. Looking at the church, though, it was way creepier than I had remembered. It looked like the forest had engulfed it. Even the fence around the courtyard was almost unrecognizable, drowned in tall plants covering it. We made our way through a broken section. It was very quiet as we approached the church. We didn't see any lights or hear anything to indicate anyone else was there. So, we walked up to the large entrance door and pushed it open. The sound it made was like bending wood, creaking and scraping across the floor. It echoed through the whole room. Both of us stayed at the doorway for a minute, just looking. What was really odd, and also kind of creepy, was that the whole room, full of rows of benches, looked almost untouched. There wasn't any debris anywhere, or even graffiti like you'd expect from an old place like this. I stepped in, and Colton followed behind me. I slowly walked down the aisle, just looking around at everything. Each step we took echoed throughout the high ceilings, but when we got closer to the end, there was a sudden thud. It rang through the whole church. Both of us jumped and quickly got our phone flashlights out. We couldn't tell where it came from, though. The sound kind of took over the whole building and echoed everywhere. We stood still, moving our lights around, looking for anything that had caused the sound, but we really saw nothing. Colton thought he saw another room closer to the entrance, and maybe something had fallen over in there. Regardless, we kept exploring. I walked to the end of the aisle where the podium was. I stood up there and looked back down at the way we came. It was so dark by the entrance, even my light couldn't reach that far. After a minute, Colton said he wanted to check out the other room, so we both headed over there. On the side wall was a door. I opened it and shone my light in. From just a quick look, I couldn't tell what the room was. We walked in and looked around. There were chairs stacked against the wall and a bunch of boxes everywhere, like storage or something. While we were in there, we heard a sound. We both stopped moving. It was a light thump, then another. It sounded like someone walking down the aisle we'd just come from. Both of us froze up. The sound was coming from the podium area, walking down toward the entrance. We could only see out the thin crack in the doorway of the room we were in, but we stared at the darkness out there and waited as the sound got closer. Then, for a split second, someone crossed through the dark and out the front entrance door. The footsteps then stopped, and we held our breath as we waited. Then we heard the door creak closed. We looked at each other in fear. Neither of us knew whether to try running away, hide, or what to do. We ended up just waiting in fear for several minutes until we thought whoever it was had left the area. Then we sprinted out of the room and out the entrance. We didn't stop running until we got down the deserted road and onto the street. We don't know who was in there, but they came from the end of the church that I had just been at. There were no doorways over there, so they had to be hiding or something, right next to me. That is, if it even was a person at this point. Years later, I can't even say anything is for sure.